Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. I'm so glad you stopped by today because today we are going to finish up our moon dragon that we started yesterday. Yesterday we got all the clay pieces done, they're painted up, so today we're going to get the sewing and putting everything together and just finishing the piece. Anyways, let's get started. Now the sewing for this is going to be really complicated. I made a very complex pattern for it. It's not too bad. It's very similar to probably the iguana pattern that I used, except I stretched out the limbs to make them more lengthy and long and stuff like that. I mentioned this in the last video that my main inspiration for this is a tree monitor and then a fan-throated lizard. So the body is going to be very long and lengthy, and then we also have a decorative thing for the throat. You can't see it right now, but the tail is extremely long. I don't have it on camera because I can't fit the whole thing on camera. And then we have some really nice large wings for the piece. One thing that I think is really cool about the design that I came up with for the body is we're going to have the wings web off from the back legs. Now the back of the dragon, I wanted to do something really decorative, so I have these little wiggly designs that I'm going to cut out of felt, and I'm just going to have these running down the back of the dragon. Most of the back of the dragon is just going to be jet black. It's going to be kind of plain, so I wanted to add just a hint of decoration to it. So I think the first bit of sewing that we're going to work on is going to be the belly and then the little thing for the throat. Now I'm going to be using the sequins fabric that's kind of pearlescent. It is reversible, but I don't really plan on using the reverse feature of it. I mainly like this one direction. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the two side pieces for the throat fan and we're going to sew down one side, which is going to be the outer side. And then we're going to take the piece of fabric for the belly and we're going to sew this at the base of the fan. Afterwards, our throat and our belly are going to look something like this. Next, we're going to be working on the decorative pieces for the back of the dragon. So these pieces are going to be made out of felt, so I got everything cut out using my patterns, and what we're going to be doing is we're going to be painting these. Now I started off with a purple felt, but I want to have it fade from a black to a purple. So the reason I started off with purple was because that's going to be our lighter color, and it's going to be easier to darken this up than it is to brighten up a black piece of felt. So I'm going to get all my pieces of felt nice and damp, and we're going to start adding some black paint to the base of these. And we're also going to be using our paintbrush to try and blend the black into the purple a little bit. After I get all of those painted, both sides are nice and done, we're going to let those dry. Once they're dried, we can start sewing them onto the piece of fabric for the back of the dragon. So the back piece is just a normal piece of black fabric, it's nice and plush, and what we're going to do is we're going to cut right down the middle of this. We're going to take the larger piece of felt and this is going to be the middle piece. So I'm just going to layer these together and we're going to close everything up, just sewing the felt in between the two layers. And then after we have the middle piece in place, we can take the other two pieces, cut slits for them, and sew those in place as well. And then this is what our back piece looks like all put together. After that, we're going to work on making the wings. I kind of want to get all the different body pieces done first before we work on the actual body. That way we have everything ready to just attach to the body later. So I used my pattern and I traced it out on the lighter color. I'm going to have the underside of the wings a nice purpley pink color, and then the back side is going to be black. So I'm going to sandwich these two layers together and we're going to sew all the way around it, closing everything off, and then the base of the wing is going to be left open so we can flip it right side out. I mentioned this in the other video that my main design is to kind of have the back of the dragon black and then the underbelly to be very bright. So everything that's going to be on the bottom of the dragon is going to be very bright and then it's going to fade to a black. So that's why the under part of the wing is going to be the lighter color and then the back part of the wing is going to be black. Okay, so after we have our two layers of fabric put together, we've flipped everything right side out, I'm going to sketch out where we want to have the wing pattern, and then we're going to follow all these lines with the sewing machine again. I recommend pinning these two layers of fabric back together. Even though they're sewn together, they'll still kind of slide around, so it does help to kind of add a few more pins in place so it doesn't slide while you're sewing these lines in place. Okay, so now we're going to start working on the pieces of fabric for the body and the legs. So the fabric that we're using for this is a really deep purple sequins. I love the color of this. And then I have another piece of fabric pinned to the back of this because the sequins is kind of sheer, and this is going to be where we draw everything out, and we're just going to sew these two layers together by following the lines of the pattern that we have traced out. So I'm doing this for the sides of the body and then the outer portions of the legs. After I follow all my line work with the sewing machine, I can start cutting out my pieces. This is what the two side pieces look like, and you can see that I also follow the lines of where we're going to connect the legs and the wings. So there's some line work here which is mainly for a guide to help me connect everything to the body. So now that we have the side pieces of the body, we can take our belly and our throat piece and we can start sewing this in between the two layers. Now I want part of the fabric, which is for the throat, to come off of the clay piece a little bit, so I'm not going to start right at the very tip of this, I'm going to kind of start halfway through. So that sewing had to be done by hand because the reversible sequence is a little tough on my sewing machine and I didn't want to break any needles or anything, so I figured I'd just do it by hand. After that, I'm going to take the tail, pin it together, and sew down the bottom of it with my sewing machine. Okay, so now we just need to kind of prep the fabric for the legs and then we can start putting everything together. So I have the pieces of the legs all pinned together and we're just going to be sewing down the front of them. So the top portion of the legs is going to be the sequins fabric, and then the under portion is going to be basically the same fabric that we're using for the under portion of the wings. Okay, so now we can finally start putting everything together. So I put together a very simple wire frame and we're going to start putting everything on this. So I'm going to start with the fabric for the body and we're going to cut some holes for the leg wires and we're going to run this over the wire frame. We're then going to take our clay head, which we made in the last video, and we're going to glue it to the wire for the neck. After that's in place, we can take the fabric for the neck and start gluing that around the base of the head. While we're doing this, we're also going to be gluing the fan in place as well at the very bottom of the head. Now we're going to take that back piece that we made and we're going to glue it to the very top of the head. We're going to let everything dry for a little bit and then we can start sewing down the sides of the neck. We're going to stop our sewing right above where the shoulders would be, and this is where we're going to have the wires for the wings stick through. So we're going to kind of have a little bit of a gap and then we can continue sewing down the rest of the body on both sides. Now I realized before I continue going down the rest of the body that I need to kind of separate the fan on the throat from the actual neck. And the main reason I'm doing this is because once we start stuffing it, we're going to end up stuffing the little fan as well and it's just going to turn into a bulge. And I don't want any stuffing in this, I want it to be completely empty. So what I need to do is I need to pinch these two layers of fabric together and sew in between the seams, right where the two different sequins combined. And doing this will separate the fan from the neck, so when we stuff the neck, none of the stuffing will go into the fan. And then after that's finally done, we can continue going down the rest of the body. And of course, we're going to be stuffing this as we go, and we're going to stop right where the back fabric ends. Now what we need to do is we need to flip our dragon around and start working on that tail. So I'm going to take that gem that we made in the last video, and we're going to be gluing this to the end of the wire for the tail. This is very similar to how we connected the head to the wire frame, and just like that, we're going to take the fabric for the tail and glue it around the base of the gem. We're going to let that dry a little bit and then we can start sewing up the back of the tail and stuffing it. Okay, so the main body is done, now we just have the limbs. So we're going to start with the front legs, move on to the wings, and then do the back legs. The way I have the pattern set up, we need to do it in this order. So I'm going to take the fabric for the front legs and start sewing it into place. I'm going to follow those little sewing marks that we made earlier and just go all the way around that little wire that's sticking out. We can then take our clay feet for the front legs and we can start wrapping them onto the wires for the legs. So I'm just going to take the wires that are sticking out of the back of the clay legs that we made, and I'm going to take a smaller gauge and just wrap them onto the wire frame. We're going to make sure that is nice and secure, and then we can take the fabric for the legs and start gluing it around the wrists. After that, we need to stuff the legs and close them up. Now what we're going to do is we're going to add the wings to the body. So what we need to do is we need to take the wings that we made earlier and we're going to run them over the wires for the wings. We have a portion of the wings that we ended up closing off from the rest of it and stuffing, and we're just going to run the wires through that portion. After that's in place, we can start sewing it onto the body. We're going to start at the front of the wing and just go around that one portion that's stuffed, and we can also add a little bit more stuffing to that as well. Now I didn't add any sewing guidelines for this, but I'm just going to kind of freehand it. But we're sewing it to the body similar to how we did the legs. Then we're going to take the webbing of the wing and we're going to sew this down the side of the body. I have guidelines for this as well, and we're just going to follow those as we sew it down. Now before we add the back legs to the dragon, I realized I kind of messed up with sewing the two layers of the back legs together. I shouldn't have sewn down the whole front of the leg. I needed to have done only half of it. So the very top portion of the leg is where we're going to connect the wing fabric to it, and I needed to leave that open, so I'm going to have to pull out my stitchings for this, and then we can do the sewing. Once I get those extra stitchings out, we can sew this to the bottom portion of the wing. So I have a portion right here, and we're just going to kind of sandwich the webbing of the wing right between the two layers of the legs and just sew that into place. Then we can take the base of the back legs and start sewing this onto the body. Again, there's going to be guidelines that I sewed into place earlier, so we're just going to follow those. Now we're going to take our clay back legs and we're going to add those to the wire frame, similar to how we did the front legs, and then we can take the fabric for the back legs and start gluing them around the ankles. We're going to let that dry a little bit, and then we can stuff the back legs and close them up. Now that is pretty much all the sewing for the body. Everything is all put together. Now what we're going to be doing is painting our sequins to add a little bit more realism to it. So similar to how we painted the clay pieces, we're going to take those same colors and start adding them to the sequins. Now when I'm painting sequins, my goal isn't to completely change the color, it's to just alter the tint of it. So we're not going to be completely covering up the sequins. Most of the color is going to peek through the paint. We're just trying to add a little bit of a different hue to it. So we're not using a ton of paint when we're doing this, we're just kind of putting a little bit down and blending it in. So what I'm basically saying is don't just go at it and add a ton of paint to your sequins, you don't need a lot. Now this is one of those things where I don't really have a full-on plan, I'm kind of just adding colors as I go, just changing it here and there until I like it. Now I know I want to continue the markings that we have on the side of the face, down the side of the neck, but I don't want to add a ton of it. I just want to kind of add a little bit to make it a bit more brighter and add a bit more color to it, because that fan thing we have on the neck is so pretty right now that I don't want to distract from it. I want it to be kind of a focal piece that you focus on when you look at it. Now the colors that I'm mainly using for the sequins, like we did with the clay pieces, are like a black, a lighter purple for a highlight, blues, browns, things like that to try and make the sequins look a little bit more realistic, because that purple, it's beautiful, but it's just not really realistic. And then the last thing that I did was I wanted to add a bit of a white highlight to kind of define the features on the neck. And then I think that's about it. I just need to let everything dry and our dragon is all done. Okay guys, and that's how I made a moon dragon inspired off of real reptile species. I had so much fun with this project and I can't wait to do more creatures like it. Anyways, I'm going to have him along with a bunch of other creatures in my Etsy shop. Check the links down below if you want to buy anything. Thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure to like, subscribe, do all that fun stuff, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!